Hello everyone, welcome to the Cloud Data Engineering by Naresh Vemla YouTube channel. Today we are going to discuss about Azure Data Engineering interview questions. So these are the most asked interview questions on Azure Blob Storage when you're attending for data engineering interviews. Before we begin, let me give you one important information. So when I am interviewing candidate for Azure Data Engineering roles in my current company and previous companies, I found that people are good in Spark, Data Factory, Databricks. But when it comes to Azure Blob Storage, they're not able to answer even basic questions. So if you focus on these 9 questions, you will be able to get good understanding of Azure Blob Storage and you will be able to answer most of the questions. So let's start with the first question. That is, what is Blob Storage? So Azure Blob Storage is a cloud-based object storage service provided by Microsoft Azure, designed to store and manage large amounts of unstructured and semi-structured data, such as images, videos, document, files, and backups, and other binary and text data. Blob stands for binary large objects. This is a basic different definition of Azure Blob Storage. Next question is, what are the different types of blobs? So most of the people are unable to answer this question. Let's get into the answer. There are 3 types of blobs. One is blob, next one is append blob, and third one is page blob. So let's understand where we are using these different blobs. So blob is used to store the files in a blocks of data. And append blob is also made up of blob, but it is optimized for append operation. So that's why append blob is used. And page blobs contains the VM disk. Like whenever we want to take a backup of any VM or take the cloud backup, that time page blobs are used to take the VM disks backups and other things. So in our day-to-day big data or data engineering, we mostly use blob. Next question is, what is Azure Data Lake Service? So in Azure, we have storage account, and in that storage account, we will have 2 types. One is Blob Storage, and other one is Azure Data Lake Service Gen 2, that is ADLS Gen 2. So ADLS Gen 2 is optimized for big data analytics and it supports hierarchical namespace. When we call hierarchical namespace, it's nothing but folder structure. You can create folders within the folders. That's called hierarchical namespace. Whereas blob storage will have flat namespace. So in the next upcoming questions, we will understand more details about the differences between blob storage and ADLS Gen 2. So this is the most often asked Azure Blob Storage question. That is, what are the differences between Blob Storage and Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage account? So mostly people answer the first option, that is Blob has flat namespace, whereas ADLS Gen 2 has hierarchical namespace. So other than this, we have few more concepts to explain. Let's get into them. The next one is ADLS Gen 2 is optimized for big data workloads. And the blob is optimized for large unstructured and semi-structured data. The next point is very important, like most of the people are not able to tell this. It's like, so when we wanted to take a decision of whether to choose blob storage or ADLS Gen 2, we need to understand our requirements. Is it our storage requirement or a compute requirement? So for storing the data, so blob storage is much cheaper than ADLS Gen 2 storage. But for example, you are running a transformation job which is pointing to your blob data. That time, for retrieving the data from blob, the compute cost will be more compared to the ADLS Gen 2. That's why we have to take a like informed decision when we are uh, working with blob storage and ADLS Gen 2. So you can understand like cost is high for blob and less for ADLS Gen 2, that is compute cost. Whereas storage cost, it is less for blob and high for ADLS Gen 2. Like ADLS Gen 2, you can get granular access controls, like you can give folder level access as well. Whereas in blob storage, it's a flat namespace, so we'll not have much control over the like granular access control will not be available in the blob storage. This is also one of the most often asked question. So what are the differences between ADLS Gen 1 and Gen 2? Now in industry, most of the storage accounts are Gen 2 and nobody is using Gen 1. I think already support is stopped for Gen 1. But in interviews, we will get this kind of question to understand whether we are working in Azure Data Engineering for past couple of years. Okay, let's understand the answer. So Gen 1 is made up of HDFS file system, whereas Gen 2 is built on top of the Azure Blob Storage. And Gen 1 doesn't have any cool, hot, or archive types or redundancy option. We will understand the redundancy options in the later section of this video. Okay, so but Gen 2 supports these latest options of like access controls and lifecycle management like cool, hot, archive, and redundancy options. When we say redundancy, there are like LRS, ZRS, ZRS, GZRS. These are the different redundancy options available. And third one is Gen 2 supports object storage as well as it is highly scalable and secured, whereas Gen 1 is not that highly efficient for storing large amounts of data and object storage. What is the best way to store data in Azure Storage Account for analytics workload? This is an open-ended question which lets you answer different parts of the Azure Storage Account, and interviewer can understand how you know all these services. So like whenever you are dealing with analytic workload, there are two considerations for us. Like one is blob storage and ADLS Gen 2. But whenever we are getting the data from external sources like IoT sensors or telemetry data, we need to ingest the data to blob storage. Once we ingest the data to blob storage, we have to again ingest into the ADLS Gen 2 for the transformation layer, because you cannot transform the data from the blob storage, because as I said earlier, since compute costs are high for blob storage, and also you need to get the faster performance in big data. For that purpose, you have to use ADLS Gen 2. So once you ingest the data from blob to ADLS Gen 2 in a standard like staging or landing layer, from there you can do the transformations. So since ADLS Gen 2 is optimized for big data workloads. Yeah, another question is like, what is the Storage Explorer? The Storage Explorer is an desktop application that is used to access Azure Storage Account. It is a nice graphical interface. You can get all the storage accounts in one place, and you can even copy or download. You can do several other things in Azure Storage Explorer. You can explore about the Azure Storage Explorer. Next, the most important question is, what are different types of redundancy options? So first of all, let's understand what is redundancy. The redundancy is nothing but having the data in a different like copies of data in different places. That's called redundant. So in Azure Storage Account, in the event of any one of the data center failure or region failure, we should be able to retrieve the data from secondary region. So this is the way of Azure implements on its own. We don't need to do anything extra to have this redundancy option. But at the time of Azure Storage Account creation, you can select what redundancy option you want, either LRS, ZRS, or GRS, or ZZRS. So these are like, let's understand what is each concept is. Let's understand first LRS. The LRS is the least redundant option that you can select, and this you can apply it on development environments for your test. You don't need to have multiple copies of data for development data. So it's a like locally redundant storage. It maintains the three copies of data in primary region physical data center, and it did not copy to some like multiple data centers. It will be there in the same primary region. Next thing is ZRS. It is zone redundant storage. This copies the data to three different availability regions in the same region, in the same primary region. Next one is ZRS. This is a geo-redundant storage, which means it maintains the three copies in primary region using LRS and copies the data three times to the secondary region using LRS. And the most highest redundancy option is ZZRS. It maintains the data to three different availability zones within primary region using ZRS, and also copies the data three times to secondary region using LRS. What are the different ways how we can connect to Azure Storage Account? So there are three ways to connect to Azure Storage Account from our application. First thing is like access keys, and next thing is shared access signatures, and third one is managed identity plus role-based access control. There are three different ways. So let's understand each one. Like access keys. Access keys gives the full control over the storage account. That's why access keys is not advisable from any data engineering application. There is a next thing, a shared access signature. This is like we can grant at container level or at subfolder level, or we can also grant read access or write access and read plus write access, and also time-based access. Let's say if we want to give only a few hours or few minutes of access, we can grant that, and also IP-based access as well. You can configure the IP addresses of those who can get this particular shared access signature is accessible. And next thing is managed identity. Every Azure service comes with its own managed identity. So whenever you are like connecting from Azure to Azure, managed identity is the most preferred way of connecting. And along with that, you need to also have role-based access control. So role-based access control is nothing but in each service you have IAM section. So in that you need to provide the required IAM roles. So for example, if you talk about blob storage, you have blob storage reader, blob storage contributor, or blob data contributor. Like there are multiple IAM roles. So based on our needs, we need to grant the IAM role as well for that. So these are the different ways how we can connect to the storage account. So these are the 9 important data engineering questions. Please go through them once more. Like these are very useful as well. And if you like this content, please subscribe, like, and share the video.